Let's go ahead and get started with just plugging it in and double checking our symptoms. So one thing we'll do here is notice that we do have a standby light down here. It does take a second to come on, and then it will slowly fade away, and that's normal. Once it fades away, then you can actually go ahead and power up the TV set. So we'll go ahead and do that, and it does come back on. So let's see what we get on screen. And sometimes it does take a second for it to boot up and show picture, but by now I would have expected something to happen, and it has not. Something else that I'm noticing is that our light has faded away and is no longer there. And we still don't have any picture, no backlight, nothing going on. So this is actually very common. This is an issue that we deal with a lot for this set, and it's going to be a mainboard related problem. So let's go ahead and take the TV apart and open it up and take a look at that mainboard. And in this TV here, I'm actually noticing we have a couple of screws that are stripped and a few that are missing. So it looks like someone's opened this before, which should be fine as long as we don't have any damage to the connectors or any of the boards internally. And I think that should be it. Yeah, and normally there's a couple clips that are supposed to kind of hold this in a little bit. I feel like that was a little too easy to open it up, so someone's definitely opened this before. Okay, so this board over here is our main board. This is the one we're going to be focusing on. Now, usually for these types of sets, what we see is a failure on the BGA chips that are located underneath this heatsink. This heatsink, however, is not really easy to remove. You have to actually desolder some of the pins on the bottom side of the board in order to remove it. Usually what we'd like to do to confirm our diagnostic that the main board is the issue is use a hot air gun to heat up the board and essentially warm up the chip, warm up the joints that connect the BGA chips to the board, and what that'll do is it'll cause an expansion because often what happens is we get cracked solder joints on those solder joints between the board and the chip. So heating it up will cause them to expand and temporarily force that contact, and thus will allow the set to turn on and work temporarily. Now, because we can't remove this heatsink very easily, I'm not going to really show that right now. I could heat up the heatsink. Most likely it's not going to work because I'm not really heating the chips themselves. I'm heating up this entire heatsink. So it would take a lot of heat for us to get it to work. But what we'll do is we will show you how to remove this heatsink, and we're going to do the actual repair process on screen, show you what we do, how we do it, and then once we do that, we'll put the main board back in and see the results. Okay, so we have the board out now, so we're going to go ahead and bring it to our rework machine and get started on the repairs. And if you do like this video, if it is helpful for you, please just reminder to give us a like and subscribe. It'll really help us. We appreciate that. We have the board on the bench, and before we get started on the removal of the heatsink, I did want to point out that over here, we're supposed to have an 8-legged IC that's an EEPROM, and that is missing. So whoever was trying to open up the TV in the past and do a repair, well, they didn't replace the EEPROM, or they did and then removed it. I don't know what the case was, but right now we don't have an EEPROM, so that is something we will have to install. Something I do want to mention for these TVs is we have done hundreds of repairs for these boards, and in our experience, not once was an EEPROM the cause of the issue. I know that there's certain retailers that sell them as a repair kit, but I have never seen that be the issue. I'm not saying that it's not possible that it could be the issue for your board, but out of the hundreds of boards we've fixed, that has not yet been a problem, something that we've had to replace in order to fix the board. So just be aware of that. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and desolder our heatsink. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some flux and some solder to our joints. In order to have an easier time soldering that joint in there, we're going to just remove this heatsink here. and it's really on there. So just be gentle. I know you're going to want to probably put a lot of force, but it's a circuit board, so just be careful with that. Okay, so I'm going to use this little flat spatula tool to help pry up a little bit. And I'm actually going over here with it. I'm not going over here because I have a lot of capacitors down below this heatsink, and I know that I don't have anything populated over here, so this area is a safer area for me to put a tool in and not damage anything. Yep, there we go. Okay, perfect. Alright, and then we're going to use our desolder gun. And actually, I'm going to get this fume extractor a little closer. So the first thing I'm doing here is I'm actually just adding more solder so that I can make sure to have a really good flow. That's the last one. So now we have these separated. Put our heatsink off to the side. So one thing I'll show you here is the original thermal paste that is on these chips is bone dry. So it most likely is not really allowing proper heat transfer. It's very crusty. So once we do our repair, we're going to want to make sure we put new thermal paste on there. So we'll go ahead and do a quick cleanup with some alcohol, get that nice and clean, and then we'll put it on the rework machine.
Okay, so Nick has handed me this board for rework. Usually you can get by only reflowing one of these chips. However, we're going to rework both of them, as both of them can fail, and we do not want to have any reoccurring failure, as we have a 1-year warranty on this repair service. Okay, so we've reached our desired temperature and the first chip has now been reworked. We're going to move on to the second one now. Alright, so we're now going to begin the repair of the second BJ on this board. Once again, you're going to want to repair both of these, as the board probably will come back. I'm going to begin the repair of the second BGA. As mentioned previously, you do want to repair both, as there's a high chance of the board coming back if you don't rework both of these. Alright, so we're going to begin by once again adding our No Clean Kester 951 flux. You don't really need a lot, and I usually just do like the left and then the bottom side, or the top or the right, just enough to get essentially half the chip, and then what happens is the flux will pool under the chip, and that's how you know you've put pretty much enough, because if you're starting to see it bleed out the edges, then you know you've put too much. And looks like we have our bottom heat properly aligned. Alright, we're going to start it up. It looks like we've reached our desired temperature, and the chip is now reflowing. Alright, so after doing our rework, we're going to want to check these caps and make sure we have no shorts. That looks pretty good. That's also pretty good. Some of these caps will have 5 ohms for resistance, but that could be on one of the other variants of this board, as there are a few variants. So this board is ready to progress.
Our EEPROM already removed from our donor board, and to know the correct orientation, what you can do is take a quick look on the board. There's a little dot over here, and there is the number 1, so that indicates pin 1. And on the EEPROM itself, at the corner over here, I also have a dot, which means that that is the pin 1. So I know that this is going to be the correct orientation. Okay, everything looks good. All right, so then I'm just going to go ahead and spray a little bit of alcohol, clean it up, and before we put the heatsink back on, we're just going to test it real quick in the TV to make sure everything works and that there's not any additional work that needs to happen. So I just connected the connectors back in. The board is loose. I don't have any screws on there, so I'm just going to be careful. And of course, since we don't have our heatsink back on, we're not going to want to let it stay on for too long since these could overheat. So we'll go ahead and plug it in. Take a look at our light down here. It is still lighting up. We'll wait a second for it to fade away. Okay, and we'll boot it up. Let's take a look. I'm not going to lift it all the way just because of the fact that it is not screwed in. But we do get a logo and we have our backlight, so that's very good news. I'm pretty sure we have a winner. Yep, all right, and we're getting our HDMI 2. And then in a second it should say no signal. All right, it worked, so we're all set. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect it real quick because I don't want it on for very long. All right, so we're just going to be putting a little bit of our thermal compound. MX-4 is what we use. So I'm going to go ahead and put just a tiny little bit on the top here. And it kind of comes out really fast. So I'm just going, oh, there we go. Just going slow. And you really only need just a bead of this stuff. Now when we put the heatsink back on, it should spread itself out on its own, but I just want to make sure and every single inch of the die is covered. Alright, flip that over. Because you don't want any warping or any odd angles on this. If you do, then the heatsink will not be perfectly flush against the chip, and of course that can cause problems down the line. Alright, and I put some new adhesive over here for our larger heatsink that was on the back of our second BGA here. Okay, and it's on there properly. So we're all set. All right, so with this board, actually, there's one more thing I wanted to mention is we don't have any thermal pads on the bottom. And of course, I'm very confident that originally this TV should have had some sort of pads. So we're going to put our own. This one requires 5mm pads. They're just thermally conductive pads, so we're going to put them below the BGA chip here. And one side has this sticky adhesive. The other one does not, so of course I'll make sure to put that facing towards the board. And there's no BGA here, but I know that by default these come with one right here. Okay, so it looks like we're all set. We'll just plug in an HDMI here in a few minutes and we'll let it run for a little bit, like I said earlier. And once it's all set, we'll let the customer know.